This is Marshall Goldsmith. Welcome to LinkedIn Live. So happy to be here today. We're going to have a wonderful show. And today's show is about the power of ideas. Can management thinking save the world? Well, kind of a big topic, and we've got a couple of wonderful people to join us. I'm going to briefly introduce myself, then kick it over to my comrade, Sanyin. My name is Marshall. I went to school in Indiana, got a PhD at UCLA. I was a college professor and dean when I was very, very young. Then for 43 years, I predominantly did three things. One, give talks or teach classes, traveling all around the world speaking and teaching, and wrote books and articles. I've written or edited 41 books, 6 bestsellers. Then I coach executives. I've been the coach of probably 200 people, the CEOs of many of the top companies in the world. And I'm so happy to say the huge majority are still my good buddies. So it's been a great, great fun ride for me. And one thing I'm very proud of is two people today, Thinkers50. I've been honored to be ranked as one of the top 10 thinkers in the world for 8 years in a row, and then business thinkers. And they now have something called a Hall of Fame. I was usually the highest ranked person on that list who is an executive coach. And when you get old, they've got this great idea called the Hall of Fame. They put you in the Hall of Fame, which is good because I like it, because then you don't have to worry about competing anymore. And they have a nice award for coaches called named after me, Marshall Goldsmith Award for coaching. And this year's winner, the person who's replacing me in #1 coach award, is my lovely, lovely and special comrade, Sanyin. Sanyin, introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sanyin, and I'm the Executive Director at Duke University's Fuqua Coach K Center on Leadership and Ethics. Now, in my life, there's 2 recognitions I'm super proud of. One is Thinkers50 being recognized as the world's #1 executive coach for my work with board directors, CEOs, and students. And it was really important to me because Thinkers50 is about ideas that matter. The second designation is being named by LinkedIn as one of its top global influencers for 2 years in a row. And LinkedIn is about driving conversations that matter. And so today's show is very special because we're going to have a conversation that matters about ideas that matter. Back to you, Marshall.
You know, again, I'd like to introduce the 2 founders of Thinkers50. There's Stuart Crainer and Dearlove. Stuart, co-founder of Thinkers50, has been an editor of the Financial Times Handbook and also a fantastic book about management this century. Just a great, great guy. And Des, also co-founder of Thinkers50, and I formerly was a writer for the Times. So of course, I said the Times of London. If you're from there, they just call it the Times, as if there's a like the British Open, just the Open, But for the rest of the world, we'll say the Times. It's in London, and then is also a fellow at the business school there at Oxford, the Science School. So a couple of great guys. So let's get rolling. I'm going to start with this. A question. I've always been curious about this, and I don't know the answer to it. I mean, what you guys do is really amazing. How'd you get into this business? Because you're like the world's experts at this. You kind of invented this. How'd you get into this of all things?
Well, hello, Marshall. Thank you for inviting us on the show. It's great to see you and talk to you as ever. This story begins a long time ago, 20 odd years ago, when Stuart and I were both eager, hungry young journalists writing for newspapers in the UK and elsewhere, magazines around the world. And what we came to notice, we were covering management and we were reviewing lots and lots of business books. And we came to realize that what had been a flow of new ideas and management books had really become a torrent. And managers were under increasing pressure and we just couldn't keep up. So we said, wouldn't it be great if there was a consumer guide, a sort of a which idea, to help people sort through the kind of the golden nuggets and tell the difference between the good stuff from the stuff you didn't really need to read. So we had that conversation over a pizza in a restaurant in London, and we decided that we would do a ranking. We would create that consumer guide, and that became the first Thinkers50 ranking, and that was published in 2001. We've done it every 2 years since. And then we added to it our Distinguished Achievement Awards, which, you've got a couple of these. They look like this. And the Financial Times very helpfully describes them as the Oscars of management thinking. So that's how it all came to be.
Tell us your side of the story, Stuart.
Well, I was eating the same pizza at the same restaurant, eating pizzas with Des, and we still argue about whose idea it was, in a good-natured sort of way, obviously. I think we were really surprised when we tried the idea, because we like trying out ideas, that there was a lot of interest in it. It was on the front page of a UK newspaper, and the next time we did it, it did really well in India. It was on the front page of an Indian newspaper. So there was a lot of momentum behind it, a lot of interest. But I think what changed it for Des and I was our initial number one was Peter Drucker. Then the next number one in the ranking was C.K. Prahlad. And we knew C.K. pretty well. And what was impressive about C.K. was that he realized that the ideas he talked about weren't just about business. They were about making the world a better place. So his book, The Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid, had a huge influence on the way the poorest people in the world are treated and thought of economically. So I think once we met CK and learnt more about his work, the more we realized the potential of identifying the ideas that could really make a difference to organizations and people throughout the world.
You just mentioned two heroes in my life. Peter Drucker I was on his advisory board for 10 years, and C.K. Prahlad was also my neighbor here in Rancho Santa Fe. And, I had the privilege of having dinner with C.K. probably 2 weeks before he died. And Peter Drucker also, a couple of weeks before he died, his wife invited me up. I had to spend an hour with him. So these are a couple of really deep people. And I don't think they were just management thinkers. They were just thinkers. They were very deep, philosophical, looking at life. And I have to say, both of them made a huge positive difference for me. Sanyin, what's a good question to ask Stuart and Des?
As I listened to your origin story, I think the fog of war before was not having enough information. And today the fog of war is having so much information that we actually need skillful curation. So you, with the rankings, with the curation of ideas, we need that more than ever. So my question to both of you is, why do ideas matter more than ever today?
Well, I think
you go.
I think ideas matter because if you think of America is a country built on the idea of freedom. So ideas always matter. I mean, it always struck me, we did work in the 1990s. I wrote a book about re-engineering, and we wrote articles about re-engineering, which was a big idea in the 1990s. And I was amazed by that idea, whether you think it's a good idea or a bad idea. But very soon, after the best-selling book came out by Champion Hammer, companies were re-engineering throughout the world. So one idea, good, bad, whatever you think of the idea, had a huge influence. And I think over the years, we've become more appreciative that the ideas we write about and feature on the Thinkers50 are ideas that change people's behavior as individuals and as organizations.
We're going through a period of real crisis right now. Why do you think it's particularly important now?
I think at any moment of crisis, I think crisis, particularly a crisis of this scale, is what Warren Bennis would have called, the leadership guru would have called a crucible of leadership. We find out the real quality of our leadership when we face a crisis like this. And I think the leaders that we need to take us through this dark tunnel and come out the other side where there will be light, we know there will be, are the people that will see this as an opportunity to reset. We don't necessarily need to go back to what we had before. Maybe we can make something better. And that's all about ideas. Stuart and I've had this conversation a lot lately where we say, everything, the world may be in lockdown, but ideas aren't in lockdown. That's one of the places we can really make inroads into a better future. And we were talking to Harvard's Amy Edmondson recently, and she was saying it's so important that we're the architects of our future rather than the victims of it. So I think ideas have a really important part to play in that. And they always have done. I mean, ideas have always made the difference. If you think about someone like Copernicus, who suddenly realizes that we're not the center of the universe, he changes how we think about ourselves as a species, how we see our place in the universe. And then someone like Darwin comes along, and, you know, changes everything again. So actually, although we talk a lot about technology and the impact of technology, ideas are a much bigger lever for change, I think. And that's very much the case at the moment.
You know, one thing, Sanyin, we need to do is let's encourage people to ask questions in the chat box. You know, Sanyin, as I see, we got this award as being great thinkers, yet we always forget to tell people to ask questions in the chat box every week. So Sanyin's mission was to remind me, but since we both forgot this time, so please ask any questions that you put there in the chat box. So, because although Sanyin and I are obviously great thinkers, we're both a little absent-minded on occasion. So just write those ideas down in the chat box or questions and send to us. So Sanyin, you had a really interesting question about out of the box. What's that question?
Oh, so first of all, Des, to your comment, if we go back to the way we were exactly before, I think we would have failed, because this crisis should change us and the ideas should change us. But my question is, so at Thinkers50, I picked up my favorite book, which is a book of poetry called Atlantic Crossing, and it's by Stuart Crainer. And then I also picked up another favorite book in my family, which is Archie Grain and the Magician's Secret, written by a fellow named D.D. Everest, whom I discovered is actually Des Dearlove. So poetry and children's books, Stuart and Des, how does engaging outside of management in writing poetry and writing children's books help you think outside of the box and be even better at what you do right now? Stuart, why don't you go first?
Well, I think I wrote the book of poems about sailing. I sailed across the Atlantic with some friends of mine. I'm not a sailor, so it was a strange experience. It was actually the nearest experience I've had to lockdown, because there's not much to do in the middle of the Atlantic. But it was a really fantastic experience, and it was good to do something which I had no aptitude whatsoever, which is quite good, because I think you spend your adult life tending to stick to things you're moderately good at or you think you're good at. And so it was good to do something I wasn't good at all. Actually, after I came back from sailing, I was talking to an Olympic athlete, an Olympic rower from the British team. And he told me how he changed round, he turned round his career. He wasn't quite getting in the team. And he analysed what he did, and he realised that he was actually practising what he was good at, rather than the big thing he wasn't good at. Because I think a lot of managers in organisations spend a lot of time sticking to what they're good at, or where they think they're really good, and try and improve performance by small percentages. Whereas I think the big percentage increase are going to areas where you don't know anything, or you can't do anything, just to open your eyes and try something new. So for me, trying something new was a very, very powerful experience.
You know, Stuart, I just want to echo what you said. Wait, I got to echo one thing Stuart said. That reminds me of one of the more brilliant quotes I've ever heard in management. I think what you're really saying at a deeper level is, what got you here won't get you there.
I can't remember who said that. it was one of the great gurus, I think.
That one is deep. That was a good one. How about you, Des? What's your reflection?
I think the children's book is a real voyage of imagination. It's a completely different environment. We talk about people, making ideas accessible, and we try to, as much as possible, to reduce management jargon. And you really have to make your writing very accessible for children. They don't have huge amounts of patience, and they won't tolerate any nonsense. So you really have to be very direct in your communication. And my books, the Archie Green trilogy, was all about magical books. So not so different really, Marshall, when you think of some of your magical books that you've written in the management world. This was just taking it a little step further with you know, dragons and things coming out of the books, and playing with those sorts of ideas. So not so different, maybe.
And you know, one thing, Des, about my life, you see, I never worked at coaching children. I worked at coaching adults who act like children.
The fair number to choose from.
All right, now I got a question that's totally off of our script here, but that never bothered me in the past. You know, one kind of, I don't know what the right word is, concern, observation, reflection, whatever I have on life right now, is I think people are becoming just increasingly risk averse. If you look at it, when I was a kid, I was, I don't know, 8 or 10 years old. I would leave the house in the morning, come back in the afternoon, wandered around the world. Nobody seemed to care. Today, the parents would be arrested if you let your kids do that. When I was a kid, I hitchhiked 10,000 miles. I stuck my thumb out, traveled all around America as an 18, 19, 20 years old kid, right? And people say to me, well, today that would be so dangerous. It's actually, the crime rate is way down. The crime rate isn't up, it's down. I just think, and especially now, people are so worried about saying something that's going to go on the internet, saying the wrong thing, being correct. So I do think there's been kind of a risk aversion now. People just really hesitant to say much of anything. I find the reason coaching is so popular is people at the top are just so lonely. They feel like they can't say anything without it getting scrutinized to death. There's a couple of reflections on what I just said. Does that make sense to, let's start with Des. Does that make sense to you? And what's your reflection on that?
I think you're right. And I think it's a double-sided thing, because I think people in leadership positions perhaps are afraid to speak out. But the other side of it, which is perhaps more worrying, is that the people beneath them aren't able to speak truth to power. One of the thinkers that we've been sort of championing in the last sort of 6 to 12 months is a lady called Megan Rates, and her work is all about speaking truth to power. And I think that sense of making it okay for a leader to make it okay for the people, their subordinates and people who work with them, to say what's really on their mind, and to feel that they're in again, what Amy Edmondson would call a safe, emotionally safe space where they can bring their best ideas and their concerns to work. I think that's increasingly important. And I think leaders have to realize just how scary they are sometimes. They may think they leave the door open and people can come and talk to them, but quite often people are fearful.
Yeah, I think there's a culture of blandness in the corporate world, I think, and people are unwilling to listen to different voices and different opinions. I'm not sure they were particularly in the past either, but I think this has become clearer as the issues that organizations need to deal with become more central to our lives.
I think Tony Blair was who once said, the hardest thing is listening to the quietest voices, and that's that takes our leadership with a good ear, because otherwise we just listen to the loudest voices, and the loudest voices aren't always making the most sense.
And in terms of CEOs and their, I was going to say, in terms of CEOs and their relationship to the external world, one thing we've seen in the past few years is the rise of CEO activism, because staying silent in itself says something to the world, right? So CEOs do have to take a stand one or the other. And just as what we're seeing in the entire reopening conversation here in the United States, the one counsel that we've shared with leaders is, at the end of the day, there is no easy there's no easy decisions. There's no easy answers. We don't even have the answers, but it goes back to being able to have clarity around what you stand for, because 10 years from now, we're all going to be judged by the actions and decisions that we make today. And if those are aligned with what we stand for, and if our people in our organizations know what we stand for, then that's the best that we can do, isn't it?
Yeah, in 1990, I interviewed Peter Drucker, who I know was a great influence on Marshall, as he says. And Peter Drucker told me that the one book he always wished he could write was the book that everybody wants to write, is How to Make $1 Million and Still Go to Heaven. And I think the agenda has changed for business leaders. Over the last 20 years, we've been running the Thinkers50. 20 years ago, the emphasis was on generating shareholder value, improving profits. But now business leaders are having to tackle much more philosophical and more broad-ranging and ethical questions about what the purpose of business is, what the purpose of organizations is, and they're challenged to engage people and give them purpose in their work. So I think the agenda has changed, and I think the current crisis exacerbates that and will accelerate that.
Yeah. And a couple of reflections. First, I have a question. Megan, I didn't get how to spell her last name. I would like to give her a plug here. How do you spell Megan's last name?
So it's Megan Reitz, and that's spelled R-E-I-T-Z.
Okay, R-E-I-T. And has she written a book, or has just been talking about this?
Yeah, she's got a new book out. It's called Speaking Out or Speaking Up, and it's about speaking truth to power.
Would she be a good guest for us?
She'd be a fantastic guest. She'd be really good.
Okay. Okay, Sanyin. Again, given I have no memory, you're now in charge of remembering all this.
Done. I actually interviewed Megan at Thinkers50 and was super impressed with her work and she also gave a wonderful presentation at the gala in London, I remember.
Okay, very, very good. Okay, we'll do that. Yeah, okay. Now,
while the whole crisis has been going on, because of course the whole management thinking world seems to be becalmed for a while. There was no speaking engagements. So Stuart and I were trying to figure out what we might do to try to be helpful during the crisis. So we've been putting on Thinkers50 webinars. And one we did last week was we did 24 management thinkers in 24 hours. Marshall, you were there in California, sort of bringing the thing home. We started in Sydney, Australia, and then we went to Singapore and through Europe and across to the East Coast, and then we came across America and ended up in California. And Megan was one of the sort of star speakers in the course of that. She came over very well.
Very good. Thank you so much. Justin, do we have any good questions from all the people listening?
Oh, we do, Marshall. Thanks for asking here. I think this one could go to Des and Stu, talking about 24 hours of 24 great leaders. Malik from New York writes into us and says, what are you finding is the top trait of a noble leader in this new normal that we're finding? So you've interviewed 24 people. What are you finding is the top trait of the best leaders out there right now?
And one comment from each of you.
Okay, I would say empathy.
Okay.
I think the willingness to read the willingness to read books. The willingness to read books. I think the best leaders when we interview CEOs, I always look on the books on their shelves, and it always amazes me that many of them don't have any, and they don't even have business books. You think if you're a CEO, you'd be quite interested in learning how to make your organization more innovative or whatever, but that seems to me to demonstrate a lack of curiosity. So if if I'm talking to a leader, what I'm looking for is somebody who reads books and who's got an open mind and wants to find out about things.
You know, Stuart, it's very interesting. You mentioned Peter Drucker. Peter Drucker said this to me. His estimate was of all the books that he has written, about 15% were actually read. And when he would go into a CEO's office, if he saw his book, they would frequently say, "Oh, look, Peter, I have 3 of your books." That's quote, what he said, that's code for I didn't read these books. If they read the books, they actually say, "Peter, I read this book." If they say, "I have the book," it means they bought but did not read the book. So he was very realistic. His estimate was 15% of everything he published was actually read. And by the way, there's a management book. What's the name of that damn book? It was called, like the learning guy, the learning organization. What was his name? He wrote about the 5th discipline. Did you read that damn thing? I couldn't get through it at all. I thought the thing was just complete. I mean, I tried to read it. I made a real effort, but I have to say, after falling asleep 3 times, I had to throw in the towel on that baby. So, I mean, I see it in a lot of places. I can't believe many humans actually read that thing. It was
in irony in the fact that it sounds like it should have been called the Sleeping Organization in your case.
Oh, that's true. I can imagine for you guys, it's tough. All right. How about another good question from Justin?
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so we got a couple here. Good choices. I'm going to go with this one from Beverly Hills. It comes from Eileen Koski. Beverly Hills, California writes about the Thinkers50 ranking specifically, and she's curious, where does the feeling, acting, and executing, which she has in quotes, come into the thinking ranking?
Good question.
Well, I think execution, action and execution. We're interested in ideas that are actually translated into practice. There's nothing so practical as a great idea. So we do bear it in mind. We don't particularly rate academics who do very obscure research, which has no influence on management practice. What we're interested in is people who have a direct influence on the practice of management.
Excellent. Excellent. We get time for one more. Okay, another one, Justin.
Okay, well, this one's going to be close to home. We've got somebody writing to us from the West Midlands in the UK. So I'm not sure which one of that's closer to you guys. This is, how do you overcome leaders who are resistant to ideas and change? How do you overcome leaders who are resistant to ideas and change?
I think it's really, I think it's very difficult if you're faced with that predicament. I think the good news is that I think leaders like that will wither and die eventually. That's not very helpful, is it, at this point? What can you do? You can only be authentic and put your ideas forward, I think, and hope that they will see the error of their ways.
And you know, Peter Drucker taught me a lesson about that. Go ahead, Stuart.
There's a company in the UK called Happy, and we know the CEO. His name's Henry Stewart, and he allows people to choose their own managers, and that would be a solution to that particular issue. Most people leave their jobs because of their managers, so by choosing their managers, you get around that issue.
Well, in summary, Sanyin, what's one good thing you learned today listening to our friends Des and Stuart?
One is this idea, and by the way, in terms of leadership, I think we think about leadership as position or title and only leading down, when a lot of effective leading is leading peers and also influencing up. And so I was thinking about that in terms of that last question. What can we do to also influence up? Because we all have a responsibility to do so. But in terms of the one idea takeaway from this session is this idea that we can be architects of our future. We can be inventors of our future. And that is incredibly hopeful. And we can be better architects because of the ideas, the right ideas from management and leadership. And so I can't wait to consume more and learn more about what are the different ideas out there And it might be the idea that is most quiet and not yet seen. But guess what? I'll be going on the Thinkers50 website to look for precisely that idea.
And finally, thank you so much to Stuart and Des. You guys do a great job. Your work indirectly motivates a lot of people. It motivates me, has motivated me over the years, motivates Sanyin. Your work really motivates a lot of management thinkers to get off their ass and do something, as opposed to coast. And it's, as I mentioned to you guys, when you're successful and make money, it's easy to coast. It's easy to coast. And knowing that that ranking is coming up every couple of years, I think is very inspirational. It gets people off their butts and gets them to do something so they don't just coast. Finally, thanks to you guys. Thanks to everybody for listening in. Had a great time talking with you. Hope to have you back another time. Wait, Sanyin has one final comment.
And to give you guys a look into what's coming up ahead this week, on Wednesday, we'll have international basketball superstar Paul Gasol on at 4 p.m. EDT, 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And then on Friday, we have our great friends, Aisha Bazel, who is Fast Company's 100 most creative people in the world, and Alexander Osterwalder, who is also another Thinkers50 superstar. And that's at 11:30 Eastern Standard Time. So see you guys here then.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.